Join us on an exclusive trip to London in May 2025. Highlights of this tour are a glove-making masterclass with luxury designer Rena O, an embroidery workshop at Hand and Lock, a visit to a renowned theatrical costume house, and a guided tour of Savile Row. We'll also visit specialty fabric shops and enjoy afternoon tea at Fortnum & Mason. To find out more, go to threadsmagazine.com.
Welcome to Sewing with Threads, the monthly podcast from the staff of Threads Magazine. I'm your host, Carol Fraser, and today I'm joined by Helen Hoy.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Helen. Helen has been sewing since age 10, taught initially by her mother, who had exacting standards. While transitioning to using couture techniques, Helen sewed her eldest daughter's wedding dress. In 2012, she completed her Master of Sewing and Design Professional certification. Helen is a member of the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals and has recently stepped down as the coordinator of the annual Threads Design Challenge. For 10 years, Helen had a custom sewing business, but since moving to Florida, she has concentrated on teaching sewing classes. Helen hosts an annual fashion experience to Italy, where participants see and hear how art and other influences impact fashion, both past and present. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
Helen, the theme of this podcast I've been imagining is dressmaking as an art, or the art of dressmaking. And I'd like to mention to our listeners that Helen authored an article on the art of dressmaking in the winter 2024 issue of Threads, number 228. And when she first pitched that idea to me, I was really intrigued. I started my career as an art historian, and I'm always interested in art versus craft and, what makes the difference. So Helen, I think it would be useful if we started out by talking about the term dressmaking. I know that you surveyed a bunch of your students and other custom clothiers about how they describe themselves, what term they use to talk about the business that they're in. And I'd love to hear what their thoughts were on this. Did they like the term dressmaking, or did they have other expressions that they preferred?
Well, as far as those I surveyed is concerned, there really wasn't a lot of discussion about the term dressmaking. However, for most of those, especially the ones who do dressmaking as a hobby or to make their own clothes, they used the term dressmaking predominantly. However, there was one person who used the term seamster, and that had a rather visceral reaction from me, as I immediately thought of a union worker, and I definitely don't consider myself a union worker. From another of the respondents came the Spanish word modiste, but it is just literally the translation in Spanish of the word dressmaker. So I would say that the vast majority considered themselves a dressmaker, and especially those who do this as a profession and they're living from what they do.
I found that interesting because my mother was a dressmaker when I was growing up. And that was a long time ago. And I thought by now that there might have been a different term for it. But I remember asking her because somebody said to me once, "Oh, your mom is a seamstress." And I said to my mom, "Are you a seamstress?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't call myself a seamstress," because she felt the same way, that would be somebody in an industrial context making the same garment over and over again. But she made custom clothing, and she considered herself a dressmaker.
And I found it interesting as I was looking online that the term dressmaking, at least by the Google source that I found, said the activity or job of making clothes for women or girls. And then it had underneath, today it is a hobby rather than a necessity. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah. It didn't really help my thought process, but I guess it was much more of a necessity when these words came into being.
That's true. But I feel bad that belittles an entire group of people who are incredibly talented and creative and, make their living with that.
Yes.
And that brings us to the idea of what is the art of dressmaking. Why would you consider dressmaking an art rather than a craft or a hobby, even?
So, well, in art, again, I'm going to give you some definitions and then I'm going to comment about why I think of it as the art of dressmaking. So, art is a skill as the result of knowledge and practice. And craft, dictionary definition again, is a skill and experience. So the art of dressmaking to me is the assembling of every skill and piece of knowledge that I've acquired and absorbed over my lifetime so that I can create the desired garment or ensemble.
And what are those skills? What would you put on that list of skills and knowledge?
Well, it
I know
might
it's a
take
long list.
yes, it might take a day to tell you all the skills, but we listed some of them in the article, but it's everything from the fabric and the design and the fit and the inspiration, and then the technical skills of actually being able to carry all of that out, from pattern making to cutting the garment to stitching the seams in the right way to get the desired effect, to ironing, etc., etc., etc. And I would list these. I guess it's a very broad question, but it encompasses the accumulation of my lifetime. And if I was to maybe boil it down to my top five, not necessarily in the order of importance: design, fabric, fit, construction, and finishing. So, you can have a wonderful fabric and a great design and a good fit, but if it's poorly finished, if you have a hole at the end of the zipper, a hole in the seaming, or you have a crooked hem, then it can't be classed as a great garment or as a form of art. So that's how I would think about it.
To my way of thinking, it takes years to get to that point, to be able to bring together all of those different skills and bits of knowledge so that you can use them kind of fluidly, so that your technical ability supports your design ideas and to choose the right fabric to go with the right pattern and all those different things. Is some of that something that you can just be taught, or do you feel that it is all, and is it really the accumulation of years of just practicing it and doing it and gathering knowledge the entire time?
Well, it's a variety of factors, Carol. I mean, I started off when I was age 10 and did quite a lot of sewing when I was a teenager. But then in my college years and early years of marriage, we did a lot of moving. We came to the States, we went back to New Zealand. We came to the States again. We were in the first place 2 years and then moved again. And I had 4 young children. So there really wasn't a lot of time. I also happened to be married to a busy surgeon. And so I was it as a parent. And so time was a factor in my accumulation of knowledge and refining of my skills. I think I have met a number of women, some who have come to class, some who are colleagues with whom I have discussions about techniques, and some of those have started much later in life to sew than I did, and surprisingly have been able to catch up, so to speak, very rapidly. I would consider that aptitude. I would consider that being exposed to the right teaching at the right time and having the time to just hone those skills very quickly.
That is really interesting. I have noticed that there are people who really seem to have a natural aptitude for sewing. And I've met a few who will say, oh, I've only been sewing for 2 years. Oh, I learned everything off YouTube. And I think, well, if you have this aptitude and you're doing well already, imagine if you sought out a teacher who can bring you to another level or, give yourself some time. But, it's like playing a musical instrument. There are some people who just are never going to be able to pick it up and some people who just do, whatever it is. And I think I remember David Coffin saying that what he noticed about every author he worked for who wrote for Threads was initially inspired by a love of fashion and beautiful clothing. And then, the rest of it would come to serve that.
Well, there are a few factors in my own life that are very poignant times. So first of all, my mother was a perfectionist, and she expected us to be, and I say us because she taught all of my sisters and me, she saw the value of the best fabric that you could afford because it gave great results and it also meant that the garment would last. So I can remember taking out a zipper 5 times before she thought it was acceptable. She also believed that you should be able to wear a garment inside out. So it should be as beautifully made inside as on the outside. And I find that in recent years, I've actually taught several classes on the aspect of fine finishing. The second thing that I think was a very important point in my career was going to a couture sewing class, the one at which I made my oldest daughter's wedding gown, and finding that my love of mathematics had met its match, and that had I known a lot of those techniques earlier on, I think my sewing would have progressed much faster in the little time that I had available to sew. So, writing articles is very helpful because you have to refine how you explain what you're doing. Teaching classes has been just a wonderful experience because, again, you're trying to help somebody who may not have the same learning style as you have, how to do what you have been able to do.
When you're teaching, are you teaching a particular project or do your students bring in something they want to do and then you help them?
For the vast majority of the classes I've taught, it's been a project-oriented class. I'm starting to branch out a little bit more this year and going to offer a couple of classes where it will be entitled The Dress or The Jacket, and people can bring whatever they would like to do.
I had a question for you about inspiration, because I know that's a really important part of the skills the dressmaker needs to have, is to seek out inspiration and to use it. Can you talk a little bit about that, about where your inspiration comes from or how it can be used?
Well, my inspiration comes from many sources. For long enough, fabric was the inspiration. I would see a piece of fabric and I would immediately think of what I wanted to do with that piece of fabric. In the latter years, and especially as I've been traveling more extensively and hosting a fashion experience in Italy for the last few years, I find there are other exposures that have been really significant in what I have gone on to do. One is that I have a fascination with geometrics. So I guess that comes from my mathematics as well. But I love architecture, and it might be a ceiling, or it might be a pavement outside, or it might be the structure of the entire building, or just a window. So recently I was at the Petit Palais in France, in Paris, and there was just an exquisite window there that took my fancy. Or there was the roof or the ceiling of the Pantheon that is just marvelous in its construction and detail. So architecture has come to be much more important. Color is right up there at the top of my inspiration. I have had hair going white since I was 18 and always needed to wear a lot of color to counter that. I have a relatively pale skin. And I love intense colors. I'm not very keen on heathered or muted colors. Patterns. So, I already talked about the patterns that you see in the architecture, but, there might be a pattern in the sky or in nature that really inspires me. And last but certainly not least, exhibitions of garments. And I was, in preparation for this podcast, just pulling out all of the photos that I had taken over the last year, so 2024, that gave me inspiration and informed some of the work that I've either done or I'm about to do. And it might just be walking down the street and you see a really nicely displayed garment in a shop window. So I take a huge number of photos, and I do go back over those photos when I'm starting out to do a garment for my inspiration. And then I would say that there are designers who really give me a lot of ideas. And I know that I was asked, is there a designer you look to for ideas? And my immediate answer is yes, definitely. The last one whose exhibition I saw. But there are a few that have really stood out over the last few years. So Coco Chanel would be at the top. And Christian Dior would be a really close second. But other designers that I have really been inspired by, so Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, and Cristobal Balenciaga, and Giorgio Armani. And I think all of those fit in with my personal style, which is classical. And I'm a less is more person. So I love fine design without a lot of, I was going to say without a lot of fabric, but one of the things that inspired me about the work that Sarah Burton did was a dress that I saw that had 26 meters of silk taffeta. And the top of it, all 26 meters were in the top, but they were hidden mostly behind in stitched pleats. And it was fascinating. And then as she got to the bottom of the skirt, there was, or the waist and the skirt downwards, there was just an explosion of fabric, which she then used to create roses, large roses.
Oh, I'm going to have to look that one up. That sounds amazing. I had another question for you, and now I've kind of lost my train of thought thinking about this Sarah Burton dress. Oh, okay. The question I was going to ask is, if you're sewing for yourself versus sewing for a client, how does that differ for you? I know that for you, maybe you'd find a fabric and then you'd have an inspiration that somehow you can make this fabric work. But if you have a client, they come in with a specific need. How do you work with that?
Sure. I would say that probably one of the biggest differences is that when I'm sewing for myself, unless I'm up against a deadline because I've left the process too late to be ready, I have time on my hands. And that allows me to experiment. And I do a lot of samples before I commit to the fabric. But of course, when I'm sewing for a client, I'm usually given a brief, a budget, and a deadline. And I've been fortunate that many times a client has come to me and said, this is the occasion that I want the garment for. And I'm thinking of this color, but what could you find for me? So in St. Louis, up until maybe about 2010, there was a reasonably fine fabric store where I could go and get fabric. But then when I got exposed to European fabrics through my trips up to New York, I really didn't want to sew on anything else because it's just a finesse to these fabrics and a quality that you just don't see in other things. And my least favorite fabric to stitch with is anything from China because it just feels like paper. So I was able to choose the fabrics, and usually I would present my client with 4 or 5 fabrics to choose from. And then they would ask me for ideas of how to bring about the realization of what they wanted. And because of that, I could usually choose the style, or I could make refinements on what they had in mind. I remember distinctly, though, one time a client, I said, well, we're doing this ensemble. It was a dress and a coat. What neckline would you like? And she looked at me and she said, well, what neckline do you think I should have? And a light bulb went off. It was not long after I completed my Master of Sewing and Design. And I remembered a design comment in that book of how to choose a well-balanced neckline. And it involved taking measurements of the face and the shape of the face, and therefore being able to come up with an ideal neckline. So I took photos of this client and said, well, when you come back for fitting next week, I'll make some suggestions. And I did, and she liked what she saw. In the meantime, I blew up the photograph and I took my measurements and I placed the neckline and the shape of the neckline where I thought it should be. Sometime later, after, she had gone off on to do whatever it was that she'd required the ensemble for, I saw her and said, well, how was it? And she said, I got so many compliments, especially on the neckline we chose. So it was a vindication that, there was a skill that I wouldn't have known about had I not taken that course. So I would say that there was also a feature that I was conscious of when I was making garments for other people. And that is that the garment must be robustly constructed because you don't know how this client is going to wear their garment. And I never wanted a garment to come back because my stitching had failed or my zipper had failed or whatever it was needed repairs. I wanted it to last the distance. Whereas when I am making garments for myself, then perhaps I know that I can, very gently care for a fabric. Often I'll have students say to me, well, how do you clean your boucle garments? And my first comment is very rarely do I clean them. I'm just very aware that I don't want to send them to the cleaner because I don't want the fibers to be matted. The beauty of something like boucle is that the fibers are three-dimensional most of the time. Yeah.
And don't you find that there are a lot of people who don't really understand that not every piece of clothing should be either, throw it in the washing machine and then the dryer, or send it to
Yes.
your local dry cleaner? And that, a very, very fancy garment probably should be not cleaned much, if at all, or I suppose that there are times when you can make it so that if, a difficult or tricky, delicate embellishment can be removed for the cleaning, that kind of thing. But yeah. Do you think any of your clients wear their garments like repeatedly, or do they have it for a special occasion and that's it?
It of course depends on what the garment is, but I've done my fair share of special event wear, and those are usually one-offs, and they wear them once, and maybe take them out every now and again to look at them. So recently, you'll remember that we photographed a mother of the bride garment that I had made that was done with a silk embossed cotton, and it's a really beautiful piece of fabric. And when I asked her if we could borrow it, she said, well, it's in the same place, in the same box, since the last time you borrowed it, and that was in 2017. So this was a garment that was made for her mother of the bride outfit, and no, she hadn't worn it again. She didn't have another occasion. But there are other garments that I have done that I've seen on some of my clients who are also my friends many times, and so yes, I think there's the broad variety in that regard.
Well, I do think that people should take a page from Kate Blanchett and Jane Fonda. I think both of whom are now starting to rewear clothing on red carpets that they've been seen in before, to show that there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Yes, yes. Actually, interestingly enough, my older daughter attends a good number of social events where she needs ball gowns, and over the years we have made a variety of different ball gowns. She's fortunate she can still wear them all, and she does mothball them and then bring them out and use them 5 or 10 years later. So that's been quite nice to see.
That's got to be very gratifying to know. I was thinking about, when you mentioned that you like geometrics and that kind of thing, I was thinking about your winning garment from, I forget what year it was, in the Threads Challenge, the black and white gown, column shaped with a very, very large zigzag pattern. I'll send the photo to Carrie, and then she can edit it into this podcast so that anybody who's viewing this can look at it. It's a really amazing, interesting use of an unusual fabric for an incredibly elegant gown. No wonder it was a top winner. You mentioned earlier that you like garments that you yourself have sort of a classical personal style. And I do notice that when in the garments I've seen you've designed, there's not a lot of fussiness. Every element is really well thought out, and it works well with the entire design. And I consider that to be what I would think of as successful editing when you're designing. Do you think that being able to edit like that to create a good design is again teachable, or is that something that comes with experience or just an innate sense of what belongs and what doesn't belong?
Well, I think it's a combination again, Carol, of everything. I do think you are able to teach some of those elements, mindful of the fact that every student that you have has a different style. And so I'm not going to impose my minimalist style on somebody else, but I might say to them, less is more occasionally, because I think it just bears it out. You can keep adding elements to a garment and all of a sudden it's just a mess instead of something that's really extraordinary to look at. And I don't go about, trying to create a work of art right from the get-go. That, I would say, it evolves as you're working on it. And take that 2018 challenge garment, for instance. I played with that for a month. I had the time to do so. And every day I would stand in front of my dress form, take off what I'd done the day before, and try something different, and take photographs of it, and then walk away once I'd done it and look at the photographs and talk with a good friend who always gives me good advice and knows me pretty well. And then, come back and either sketch what I had done. And for all of our readers or listeners, I should say, I'm not very good at sketching, but all of us can use a croquis and either with some tissue paper or vellum paper on top, sketch on top of it. And I'm not very good at doing it, but I find it useful at times.
That makes sense to me. And I think that the rise of the cell phone camera has been amazing for people, because you can, even if you don't have a great dress form, you can put something, wrap it around yourself, photograph yourself in the mirror, and step back and decide what's happening and whether it's working for you or not. It seems to have changed how a lot of people go about designing for themselves and even for others.
I think it also helps with fit, because you can see more clearly where the drag lines are, or where there's too much fabric from the photo rather than looking in the mirror.
Yes, that's true. It is very, very truthful. The camera is. It does not let you make excuses for yourself at all.
That's right.
Well, Helen, this has been really interesting to hear how you manage to create these garments that are works of art. They're not what I would call, art to wear. That's a whole different type of thing. But with every aspect of them thought about carefully, executed well, it's something that I think we can all aspire to doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a bit about your process and about your mindset when you're doing this.
Well, thank you for asking me, Carol, because as I said before, writing and teaching makes you hone your skills and more clearly explain. And so when you asked me a few questions ahead of time about this, it helped me to think through, what it is that I do and how I do it and my process, and why it in the end could be called an art form, because I don't, as I said, I don't start out thinking of my garment as wanting to create something worthy of art, but there are definitely times during the process that I'm stumped and I don't know which way to go forward. And I take time out to sometimes pray about it and sometimes to think about it, and come back with fresh eyes and work again. And invariably, you solve the problem much more easily. And it's those times that I think, have taken my garments to where I think of them of, this was the art of the dressmaker, that I employed everything that I knew how to do, as well as maybe something ahead of time I didn't know how to do. And now this is how I've solved the problem.
Right, exactly. Having sort of the patience to go through the evolution process of having the design come to life and the skill to make that really happen the way that you are envisioning it. That's yeah, I think not everybody has that, or maybe we all have it at different periods of time. We lose the patience and then you need to come back to it. Yeah. Very
Yes,
interesting. I think
true.
that everybody can think about that, even if you're just a beginner, to feel like nobody has the answer 100% of the time right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, that there is so much opportunity now to read. There's endless fashion books out there of how-tos, etc. There's opportunity online to hear and to see what others are doing. There are online classes and there are in-person classes, and they both have their value. You do need to choose carefully who you go to, though, because some have not studied so much or can not present it in a way that is easy for someone with a different learning style to learn. Of course, I would emphasize that when you go to an in-person class, you receive inspiration from what your fellow students are doing as well as what the teacher is telling you.
That's very true. There's nothing like being around a bunch of other people who are really interested in the same kind of thing you are, but with a different type of taste or different personal style. It does expand your viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate that you spent some time with me and Helen. You can find Helen can you tell us what your URL is?
Yes, it's my name, Helen Hoy, HAUGHEY, designs, so no spaces.com.
And you'll find out a lot about what Helen does, and you'll also be able to look a little bit at descriptions of her trips to Italy for inspiration in case you need some more inspiration. Thanks again so much, Helen.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you to our guests for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send your comments, questions, and suggestions to th@threadsmagazine.com, and please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Until next time, keep on sewing with threads.